Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I want to rank F1 rookie seasons since 2017. A couple weeks ago I did that video ranking F1 rookie classes, and today I'll be kind of doing a breakdown by driver, not looking at each group as a whole. So again, I have a couple numbers on the board here. These are just to help me. So the top, for each driver they'll have two numbers. First one is their race model score. So that's the units are two standard deviations. Positive is a good score, negative is a bad score. And then the number below it, don't know why I voted below, but that is the median qualifying gap between themselves and their teammate that year. So starting at number 19, I think a couple ones at the bottom are going to be pretty easy to guess who they're going to be. But number 19 with a median qualifying gap to their teammate of over half a second and a race score of a negative 0.94, we have Nikita Mazepin. For Mazepin, pretty awful rookie season. Qualifying was very poor. The race pace was pretty much non-existent, and he did have a handful of crashes, including crashing 3 corners into his F1 debut at that fateful 2021 Bahrain Grand Prix. Of course, for reference, his teammate was Mick Schumacher that year. I think with hindsight, looking at how Schumacher did in 2020, I think that does play a bit of a part in me deciding to put Mazepin in last. If Mick Schumacher was the second coming of Ayrton Senna or the second coming of his father, then I think we would be a bit more understandable about his performance compared to his teammate. But that being said, Schumacher had a pretty underwhelming second year in F1. I think that definitely holds Mazepin back as well. Just kind of as an extra note from Mazepin, we know that Haas didn't have a simulator for that year. They don't have a simulator at all, as a matter of fact. But Mazepin was not able to use a simulator to kind of get accustomed to a lot of the tracks. So he was basically learning tracks on the F1 game, which is not how I would recommend doing it. So again, that definitely could have contributed to his massive gap to Mick. And again, we will never know what Mazepin could have done in his second year, as of course he was dropped before preseason testing 2022. Now, moving up, number 18, another driver who had a pretty awful rookie season, and that is Nicholas Latifi. Median qualifying gap to his teammate, 0.631 seconds. The race pace, the race gap score, race model score, a negative 0.43. A lot lower than it would have been if the Williams had been a good enough car able to score points that year. But as it was, the two drivers in the races head to head, but didn't score any points. That I think kind of makes Latifi's score look a little bit better than it actually was. Of course, his teammate that year was George Russell. Moving on to number 17, a guy who was on the grid, past tense, this year, and that is Logan Sargent. Teammate, of course, for his rookie season, Alex Albon. So for Sargent, median qualifying gap 0.545 seconds, race model gap negative 3.61, which is second biggest of all the drivers on the board. Sargent's rookie season pretty poor. Qualifying seemed to actually get worse as the season progressed. First couple of races, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, he was actually pretty close to Albon's pace in qualifying, but it felt like he really lost confidence in the car and the performances just never kind of rebounded. They did improve, like the qualifying performances did improve this year. But yeah, for Sargent, really poor rookie season, didn't have particularly good race pace either. Number 16, Lance Stroll. So for Stroll, his teammate in his rookie season was, of course, Felipe Massa. And for Stroll, when you look at the qualifying numbers, median qualifying gap to Massa, 0.774 seconds, highest number on the board. What really saved Stroll from being at last on this is that in the races, he honestly wasn't that awful. End of the season, the points gap between himself and Massa was pretty small. And again, while there was quite a bit of good luck on Stroll's side that led to the point gap being that small, he did have some decent races, and I'd say basically from Canada onwards, he had some decent results here and there throughout the season. But the race score negative 0.84, substantially better than Sargent and Albon. And again, Latifi and Mazepin, these cars didn't score any points, so again, they were helped a little bit by that. But again, not as bad as some of the other numbers on the board. So again, the race pace, race results really kind of help move Stroll, help Stroll not be at dead last on this board. Number 15. Yuki Tsunoda, and of course, teammate was Pierre Gasly. So for Tsunoda, it was a pretty rough rookie season. Qualifying was quite bad, I would say. Median qualifying gap 0.534 seconds. Didn't out-qualify his teammate Pierre Gasly until the final race of the season, which is of course the only race where I think he actually beat him on track, where both drivers scored points. For Tsunoda, very, very rough around the edges, crashes, quite a few crashes. Race pace wasn't really there, not really able to take advantage of a very, very good AlphaTauri that year. And as a result, the race model score, negative 3.67, worst on the board, is a bit of an ouch, and that definitely does hold Tsunoda down quite a bit. I think because of the fact that Gasly's a pretty strong teammate, again, I'm not putting him as low as some of the other drivers on the board. And again, because the car was quite a bit better, quite good that year, I feel like, of course, the quality of the competition around that car, in terms of rival teams, of course, is going to be a lot higher than it is at the bottom of the field, where again expectations are much, much lower. So again, Tsunoda 15th on my list of rookies since 2017. Next up. Now, it might surprise people that I'm putting Nick DeVries ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, especially since, De Vries' rookie season again was against said Yuki Tsunoda. But I think in terms of the 10 races I did against Tsunoda, they weren't great, but I don't think they were as bad as some of these other drivers down here. Median gap in qualifying 0.236 seconds, honestly not that unreasonable, but the race gap was pretty poor, negative 2.21. I think, and again, a big part of the reason that De Vries was dropped prematurely, wasn't able to see out the season, was because he came in much older, much more experienced in single-seaters than a lot of the other drivers on this list. So again, correspondingly, expectations for him going into his rookie season were much higher. So again, in a nutshell, in an absolute vacuum, I think De Vries' rookie season, the results, just looking at them on paper, weren't that bad, but of course with the context of him being much older, much more experienced, that of course is why Red Bull decided to drop him when they did. Number 13, I'm going to go with Brendan Hartley, and of course his teammate that year was Pierre Gasly. So for Hartley, I felt he had a very unfortunate rookie season. Median qualifying gap to Gasly is 0.234 seconds in the wrong direction, but the race model gap was negative 1.92, which is very, very big. But that being said, from what I recall that season, Hartley was very unlucky with quite a few big incidents at points where it looked like, maybe he might be able to get some points. Big crashes in Canada. He had his crash in qualifying, I believe, in Spain, as well as the free practice crash in Silverstone, which meant that he couldn't qualify at all. And yeah, just a very, very unfortunate season for Hartley. Just didn't really quite have that edge, that raw ceiling that his teammate Gasly did. And well, I'll talk about Gasly's season a bit later, because obviously he was also a rookie in this time period, but of course he hasn't shown up on the board. Number 12. Number 12, I'm going with Zhou Guanyu. So for Zhou, qualifying, I think compared to expectations going into his rookie season, was not that bad. Median qualifying gap to his teammate Valtteri Bottas, 0.293 seconds. And again, given that Bottas was a pretty prolific qualifier during his time at Williams, his time at Mercedes, I think many expected the qualifying gap between himself and Bottas based on Zhou's junior career to be in the half a second, 6/10 of a second range. But I think surprising many people, it was less than 3/10 of a second. Race pace not so good, and again, we'll talk about this with the driver that we have a little bit later in the video. But Zhou was in a very unfortunate situation where the car was at its best at the beginning of the season, where the deficit in terms of experience between himself and his teammate was at its biggest. As the season went along, Zhou did get quite a bit better and did get quite a bit closer to Bottas. And again, another thing that Zhou suffered with was a lot of really poor mechanical reliability. So again, I think Zhou's season as a whole was honestly not that bad. So again, 12th on my list. Now, number 11, another driver who has driven for Sauber, and again, the driver that I kind of referenced earlier, but that is Antonio Giovinazzi. Teammate that year was Kimi Räikkönen. So for Giovinazzi, first driver on our list to actually out-qualify their teammate in the rookie season. Median qualifying gap 0.013 seconds. But that being said, very, very similar to Zhou. The race pace, the gap in the races was pretty large. The race model score -2.05 to Räikkönen. And, if Giovinazzi's teammate was maybe Räikkönen that was 5-6 years younger, probably would have had him, maybe top 6, top 7, top 8 on the board. But unfortunately, at this point in time, it was already a 40-year-old Kimi Räikkönen, a guy who wasn't really taking things super seriously, and a guy who we knew was not really at his best in qualifying for the last part of his Ferrari career. And again, with that season against Giovinazzi. And again, just like Zhou, it was a car in 2019 that was really, really quite good at the start of the season, but progressively got worse as the season progressed. So Giovinazzi couldn't really show what he could do as the gap between himself and Räikkönen was getting smaller and smaller as the season went along. Number 10, so finally breaking into the top 10, and you're seeing there's a lot more blue on this side of the board, and those are drivers who have either beaten their teammates in qualifying or outraced their teammates according to my race model. So number 10, we are going to go with Sergei Sorokin. Again, of course, teammate that year was Lance Stroll. So for Sorokin, out-qualified Lance Stroll in his rookie year by median qualifying gap 0.08 seconds. Race model score, actually, I think that is a mistake. Yes, that actually is a mistake. I'm going to have to fix that. Yes, that's actually a negative. I must have written the wrong number. So that should be in red, and that should be a negative 1.21. So for Sorokin, yes, out-qualified his teammate Stroll, but in the races, wasn't quite on Stroll's pace. Stroll was slightly better, and again, peak performances like Stroll's performance at Azerbaijan and the Italian Grand Prix that year, Sorokin wasn't quite there. And I think if Sorokin had had another year in 2019 against Russell, I think he would have been more competitive than a certain Robert Kubica. But that being said, all in all, I don't think it was a terrible rookie year. Part of the reason why I'm putting it this low is, again, because Stroll, very, very raw as a rookie coming into F1. I thought pretty poor rookie year. And while Stroll in the second year was much better, in terms of F1 drivers as a whole, still not particularly good. So not the highest bar to clear for Sorokin there in terms of, for example, out-qualifying him in the head-to-head between the two of them. All right, number 9. Now, eagle-eyed viewers would have realized that there's a couple numbers where there's actually duplicates. And again, risk of putting all these numbers on the board in advance is that people will figure out where certain drivers are based on that. But number 9, I'm going with Mick Schumacher, and again, teammate Nikita Mazepin. So evens out how they're basically right across from each other on the board. So for Mick Schumacher, rookie season was okay, not amazing, but I really felt like he did what he needed to do. Out-qualified Nikita Mazepin, I think whitewashed him in qualifying. Technically, Mazepin out-qualified him a couple sessions because Schumacher either crashed in qualifying or crashed in free practice and didn't set a time in qualifying. But median qualifying gap 0.521 seconds, and then in the races a positive 0.94. Of course, neither driver scored points, but just in terms of average finishing position, where that finishing position was compared to starting position, Mick Schumacher was the better driver of the two. And while those gaps, the race gap isn't that big, it seems kind of strange to put them that far apart. Again, there's a lot of drivers who are kind of very, very close here. All right, number 8. Let's see, number 8. I'm gonna go with. Number 8, I'm going to go with Stoffel Vandoorne, and I've just realized I've forgotten to write down the race model score for that. Just off the top of my head, I'm going to guess that it's about a number in the -2, -1.8, I believe is what it is. But for Vandoorne, obviously on paper, the results in his first full season F1 2017, not the best. That being said, in terms of difficult teammates that you wouldn't want to have as teammates in your rookie season, Fernando Alonso has to be right up there with one of the top guys on that list. So for Alonso, out-qualified Vandoorne, median qualifying gap 0.345 seconds. But again, this was Alonso in 2018, still a very, very good qualifier. Maybe not exactly at his peak, but I think, for a rookie coming in, I think that's a pretty reasonable gap. And again, in the races, the 2017 McLaren was a very poor car in terms of both pace and in terms of reliability. So it was a bit hard for both drivers to kind of show what they could do. But I think even though Vandoorne lost the race score head to head, lost qualifying head to head as well, because his teammate was he had such a difficult teammate. I feel comfortable putting Vandoorne 8th on my list. Number 7. I'm going to go with Pierre Gasly, the second of our two all-teammate head pairings in this today's video. Of course, the other being Schumacher and Mazepin. Now for Gasly, out-qualified his teammate Hartley by 0.234 seconds and beat him in the race model by 1.29 in the positive there. For Gasly, he had a pretty decent rookie season, I felt. Qualifying, again, out-qualifying a much older and much more experienced teammate in Brendan Hartley, who is, again, kind of coming into F1 with a similar kind of background as Nick De Vries. In the races, I did feel like he was a bit opportunistic with how he got his points. I feel like I remember he had his big kind of breakthrough race at the 2018 Bahrain Grand Prix where he got 4th. And then he got a really good result at the Hungarian Grand Prix where I believe he was 6th, I want to say. And so those two races together accounted for 20 points of, I think, his 28 points I had total. So he had some really, really big results, but also a lot of weekends that weren't so good. That being said, I still felt like it was a pretty solid rookie season as a whole, and so I've decided to put Gasly 7th on my list. Now, number 6, this one I think is going to be a bit controversial. A driver who I think you could argue maybe could be a little bit higher, but I'm going to actually put George Russell. Again, his teammate was Robert Kubica. So for Russell, qualifying was excellent. Whitewashed his teammate Robert Kubica in qualifying. Average qualifying gap 0.488 seconds. But race model score a -0.04. And that is, of course, partially or in part because Kubica scored the team's only point that year at that very wet, very tricky German Grand Prix in 2019. While Russell, I believe, did finish ahead of Kubica more often than not, average finishing position for Russell was quite a bit better than Kubica. Because that car was so bad, and because of the way that the model is calculated, these kind of really random events where Kubica gets 1 point and then gets 100% of the team's points, it unfortunately means that this race model score is not exactly representative of how Russell, I think, did in the races. That being said, that Williams was awful, probably the worst car that I've watched in my time watching F1 live. There's probably other cars that were worse, some of the HRTs from the early 2010s. But that being said, the car was so bad, it was basically impossible for Russell to show what he could do outside of destroying Kubica in qualifying week in and week out. Number 5. Now, of course, people would realize that there's 2 sets of numbers for qualifying and for the race model score, which may confuse people, but that is because this driver had 2 teammates in their rookie season. and that is, of course, none other than Alex Albon. His teammates, of course. Well, let's see if I can fit this in. Oh dear, this is going to be bad. Kvyat and Verstappen. Yeah, so for Albon, his teammates in his rookie season, Daniil Kvyat and Max Verstappen. Started the season at Toro Rosso, but Pierre Gasly's results for the first half of the season were judged to be so poor that he was drafted into Red Bull, replacing Gasly, and that meant that his teammate for the second half of the season was, of course, Max Verstappen. So for Albon, I thought he actually had a very, very strong rookie season. Out-qualified Kvyat, median qualifying gap 0.005 seconds. Against Verstappen, not so good, a pretty big 0.561 seconds. But again, similar with Van Dorn and Alonso, being thrown into a top team mid-season, very, very difficult. And again, against arguably the best driver on the grid at the time, in Max Verstappen, of course, makes it very, very difficult to look good in those situations. For qualifying, I thought Albon was satisfactory. He wasn't great, but he wasn't terrible either. That half season with Red Bull. In the races, he was unfortunately in the negative against both Kvyat and Verstappen. Against Kvyat, negative 0.6. Against Verstappen, negative 1.75. Against Kvyat, I think he was actually a little bit unfortunate. Kvyat, of course, got that podium at the 2019 German Grand Prix, which meant that the points head-to-head, which was basically dead even going into that race, meant that Kvyat had a pretty substantial lead going out. And of course, that was their second last race as teammates together. So race model kind of, I guess, a little bit unlucky there. But that being said, I do feel like Albon was a little bit lucky in his half season against Verstappen. Verstappen, I know, had DNFs at the Belgian Grand Prix, their first race together, and then of course had that engine penalty the second race in Italy. So I remember many people were joking about how Albon was actually scoring more points than Verstappen over their first 2 or 3 races together as teammates. And again, came very, very close to getting his first podium at the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix. And if it wasn't for a contact with Lewis Hamilton, who knows what it would have been for that race. So there you go. There's number 5, Alex Albon. Again, this video is quite long, so again, we're going to try to wrap things up. So we're into the top 4, and again, these are all drivers who I think had very, very strong rookie seasons. So next up at number 4, I'm going to put Esteban Ocon. And again, this is me counting that his rookie season is 2017. He again did complete half a season 2016, but for a lot of the purposes, a lot of these kinds of analyses, I like to do first full season. So for Ocon, out-qualified by Perez, 0.073 seconds, qualifying gap pretty close. And again, Perez at that time, really, really strong midfield driver. Not a great qualifier like he is now, but like he continues to struggle in qualifying now, but still it was seen that for Ocon that was seen as a pretty decent result in qualifying. In the races, I think honestly more impressive. Race model score negative 0.46 against a guy who is seen as one of the best guys on Sunday in the midfield in Perez, and he had some pretty strong drives all throughout the season. Very strong results in Canada, I want to say. And again, I think in Baku, he was on for a really good result as well before making contact with his teammate. So again, I'm putting Ocon 4th on my list. Again, just last comment on Ocon. Force India were the best, kind of the top of the midfield that year. And Ocon, in those kinds of situations, it could be very easy for a rookie to kind of look out of place and struggle. But Ocon honestly fit in very, very well. So again, similar situation to Tsunoda, with a car that was pretty good. Tsunoda obviously struggled a lot. Ocon, I felt, did a really good job in those conditions. Number 3, so now moving into the top 3, and I think many people will know, if they're counting in their heads, they'll know who these 3 drivers are. Now, number 3, I'm actually going to go with Lando Norris. And of course, his teammate that year was Carlos Sainz. So for Norris, out-qualified by Sainz 0.028 seconds, which given that Sainz is a very, very good driver, not going to say like an elite driver, but kind of one of the best drivers kind of outside of that top group. So I think in qualifying, Norris was very, very good. Race pace, a little bit off there. Race model score negative 0.91. And if I remember correctly, I think Norris Both drivers struggled a bit with bad luck throughout the season, but it really felt towards the second half of the season, especially, that Sainz was just able to get consistent results all throughout the season, consistently being best of the rest, similar to a bit of a similar situation to Ocon and Perez 2 years earlier. But for Norris, I think it was a very, very good rookie season, just not quite as good as the top two. And I'll explain why. Number one, I think, is a bit more clear cut, but number two, I think it's debatable, but I'll explain my reasons. So number two, I'm actually going to go with Oscar Piastri. His teammate, of course, that year was Lando Norris. So for Piastri, median qualifying gap 0.179 seconds, so out-qualified by Norris. Average gap, according to the race model, negative 1.74. So for Piastri, qualifying was close at points. I think, honestly, 0.2 of a second was a massive improvement over what Ricciardo was doing earlier. And for Norris, and for Piastri, I think it was pretty clear his rookie season that his biggest issue was tire management, as you can see by that race model score. Now, while the two numbers, comparing Piastri and Norris, the two numbers are smaller for Norris, but that being said, I do think Norris last season was better than Sainz in 2019, just in terms of level as a driver. The other thing that I want to comment on is that Piastri basically came into a McLaren team that improved steadily as the year went along. And as the second season, half of the season came along, McLaren were really a front-running team, and they were arguably the second fastest team for the second half of the season. This means that, basically the drivers that Piastri was competing against directly, going wheel to wheel against, were very, very strong. These were the best drivers on the grid. Whereas for Norris, in his rookie season, he was really competing against other, midfield level drivers, as McLaren was a midfield team that year. So that's part of the reason why I was so impressed by Piastri's rookie season. The fact that he was basically able to go against these very strong front-running drivers and not look completely out of place. And that's part of the reason why I decided to have him over Norris in second. Now, finishing up this video, we got one more to go. This video is going to hit almost 30 minutes, but we'll get through it. So, number one, I think many people were not particularly surprised about this one. Whenever you think about strong rookie seasons, especially in this time frame, Charles Leclerc is always mentioned. So for Leclerc, out-qualified his teammate Marcus Ericsson by 0.512 seconds, and in the race model score, a positive 1.72. And now, while I know that Marcus Ericsson is not the strongest driver, and of the drivers kind of on the board, definitely one of the weaker ones. But that being said, Leclerc had an exceptional rookie season. First couple races were a little bit tough, but basically after they got to Baku, Leclerc looked like arguably one of the strongest drivers in the midfield. And by the end of the season, he was basically consistently getting 7th place finishes almost every Grand Prix. And at that point, this was a midfield that did have some pretty strong drivers in it. It had Nico Hülkenberg, Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso was still kind of in that group as well. But Leclerc, in that group, he stood out in a way that very few rookies have in this time frame. And again, that's a large part of why I've decided to put Leclerc's rookie season first of all the rookie seasons that we've had since 2017. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. It's been a very long video, a bit of an enjoyable video. I know there's a couple OPs in there, especially with Van Dorn, but as we continue to kind of slog through our fall break, another video that just another fun ranking video from me today. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.